My mom was selfish in her actions, and she took it upon herself to change the trajectory of my life by bashing my father and the other half of me.
You're sort of forced to be alienated from yourself as a child for a time until you start to heal. So there's alienation from the parent and from yourself.
Where are the children while all this fighting's going on? Are they listening to what you're all saying?
You're now talking about 44 million to 50 million children that are without a parent. And I think that's more important than the words.
Welcome everybody to the Anti-Alienation Project. Tonight we are going to have a panel discussion, and for anyone watching, it's important that you know that all of us here on this call have experienced a form of child abuse called parental alienation. A few people on this call have also experienced what's called parental abduction. But parental alienation is when one parent uses coercive control to manipulate a child to reject their other parent without true justification. So to start, I would love for all of us to briefly introduce ourselves, state our name, age, when the alienation began, and which parent you were alienated from and for how long. At the end of your personal introduction, I would love if you could just say like 1, 2 sentences why you speak out. So I can start. My name is Maddie. I'm 29 years old. I figured everything out about a year and a half to 2 years ago now. Speaking out against the abuse that all of us here have experienced means a lot to me because I know there are millions of other alienated children out there being held mentally hostage who deserve to live in reality and deserve to have a relationship with both parents. Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Andrew Faulkner. I am going to be 29 in a couple weeks, and I was alienated from my mother by my stepmother when I was about 5 years old, and I reconnected with my mother when I was about 18 years old. So it's right about 12 and a half, almost 13 years of alienation. Some things that make my case a little bit different than the average case is it involved traveling overseas. So there was a time throughout the alienation process where I was like quite literally a 15, 16 hour plane ride away. So in that sense, it created a lot of physical distance, and which subsequently contributes to the emotional distance that usually arises from these cases. I speak out because of two reasons. One, I think it's the right thing to do. When you're in a situation where you are able to help somebody, I think that's, if somebody needs a glass of water and they're thirsty, you give them a glass of water. It's the right thing to do. And the other reason is while I can't help my mother back in all those years, I can't go back in time and help her. I can at least do some kind of good for other parents or grandparents, siblings, what have you, who are experiencing this kind of thing right now.
I love that. That's so meaningful. Bree, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bree, and I'm 38 years old, and I was alienated from my dad by my mom. My parents had a really rough marriage. There was a lot of fighting, and um, during their marriage, they were married for 14 years, but during their marriage, my mom would kind of use me as her therapist. And so when she was upset with my dad, I was expected to be upset with him too. And then after their divorce, they had a very messy custody battle, and my mom used the court system um, against him, made a bunch of false allegations against him. The court battle ended with my dad basically giving up. But what we were told, one of my sisters and I were told that the judge just saw how bad my dad was and put a restraining order on him on our behalf. I was 18 years old and I didn't really know what to make of that at the time because there was really nobody for me to ask. Um, and I didn't really know the details of this supposed um, restraining order. Like, does it expire at some point or is it for life? And I tried to reconcile with my dad in my 20s. And we did okay there for a little while, but I still in my mind believed the things that my mom had said about him. And when my dad got remarried, she had a really hard time with that and sabotaged the relationship that I had built back up with my dad. And at that time, I still didn't know that I was an alienated child. I didn't realize that until I was almost 35. And it was at that point that I actually found out that the restraining order that we were told existed actually didn't exist at all. It was made up. Finding out that I was an alienated child made things make sense, but in like the worst way. Now I speak out because I think that it's important to talk about this form of abuse that is more common than people realize. And like I want to be what I wish I had when I found out or when I was younger. And so I just want to be, somebody who helps people figure it out and helps people get help.
Thank you for introducing yourself, Bree, and welcome, Dana.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no worries. Sorry that it wasn't clear where the Zoom link was. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Sounds good.
So let's see here. Dawn, do you think you could go next?
Sure, and see if I can remember all that. First of all, I am Dawn McCarty, and I'm still 29, and I will be forever. I was 4 years old when my mom and her new husband came to where I lived with my father and abducted me. And she had left us a couple of years before, so we had been estranged in between, a period of time. So then out of the blue, she abducted me and off we went to another state and a whole new world. So I had like this Twilight Zone kind of experience happen to me where I didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. And subsequently, I ended up with an identity crisis. And over the years, I struggled with trying to find my dad or even talk about my dad, and I would be punished if I was talking about him. So my mom's new husband was the replacement. I just had to survive the role that I was given so that I could make it through. And over the years, I struggled with wanting to find my dad. I wanted him to come and rescue me. Why wasn't he coming to rescue me? And then that would set in. And I would get brave and ask my mom questions about, did he try? Did he call me? Did he send me Christmas presents? Did he send me a birthday card? And of course, those were very negative, toxic answers that I received, and it just made it not worth asking. So I went through a cycle of resenting him for abandoning me again. So now I've had both parents abandon me, and the cycles would be, I want to find him, I want to know him, and then it would be, I'm so angry at you, you may as well just be dead. So it was kind of a struggle growing up to differentiate between the real world, what I really wanted, any of that. So the identity crisis kind of stayed into my adulthood. So I was 4 when they abducted me, and I was 44 when I finally reunited with my dad. So you can do the math and figure out how old I really am. Of course, that was in 2016. So you have to add a couple more years to figure that out. In 2016, we reunited. I found him on Facebook, believe it or not. After searching and searching, I even became a private investigator to try and find him. But Facebook ended up being the place where he was. Long story short, we reconnected within 5 minutes of me reaching out to who I didn't know at the time was my brother. I was on the phone with my dad, and I heard his voice for the first time in 44 years. So subsequently after that, 2018, he did pass away. But I look at that as a gift, a treasure that I was able to reconnect with him and have those 2 years, because it could have been the opposite, where I found him when it was too late. So I'm grateful that I did have that time to heal and get to know him. So that's why I speak out. I speak out because we can't wait. You can't put it off, and don't wait 44 years. I needed more than 2 years. So if we're waiting for something magical to happen, it doesn't happen until you do the work. So I speak out so others know how important it is to do whatever you can to make that attempt, excuse me, and find those answers, because that is the key to healing. If you don't find the missing parent, you can't heal.
So powerfully said. Thank you, Dawn. Jacqueline, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline. I'm 28. Um, I found out about alienation when I started looking for answers of why my husband and his children, after separation with his first wife, deteriorated. And I figured out that I was alienated from my dad in the same home. The reason I do this is because I feel like the first step of bringing, I guess, social change is making awareness. And by, talking about it openly in discussion, in conversation, I think that it is very important in even just speaking for ourselves and having a voice. I just offer a different perspective because I never lost contact with my dad, but all of the behaviors were the same.
Thank you. And thank you for being so involved with our support group as well. Dana, could you please introduce yourself and why you speak out?
Yes, I relate to a lot of Dawn's story in that it was a long time before I began the reconnection with my mother. I was alienated from her when I was 4 years old, and I'm 57. This was back in, I don't know, 1969, 1970, around that time. And I heard the adults in my life say things like, well, mothers always get custody. So essentially, she must have been really bad to not get custody. But truthfully, she was exiled from my life by my father, who had abused her. And I was just expected to believe that she had abandoned me. I think, like a lot of alienated kids are told, whether people use those words or not, the whole, well, she had better things to do than to be a mother. And I think I always knew the truth because I knew she wasn't bad. I didn't have bad memories of her. I mean, I didn't have a lot of memories of her, but the ones I did have were good. And I was very close to her parents and her younger sisters, my aunts. And I have a sister who's a year and a half older than me, and she was very much indoctrinated by our father. So she was the oldest. So she was the spokesperson. She was the one who would tell our mother, we don't need you here anymore. We have a new mother now. Like Dawn with her stepfather, I was told to call my stepmother mom. So this was within a year of the divorce, and we had a new mother. We were calling her mom. My sister basically acted like she hated our real mother. And I was just silent. I just went silent to stay safe. It didn't feel safe to ask about her. I think to survive the separation, my feelings for her just sort of went underground. They were repressed. So when you don't feel the love anymore because for survival reasons, you've repressed it and you're afraid to speak up, you just kind of go on in survival mode and go on with life as a kid. Anyway, it's a long story. I wrote a memoir, but to make a long story short for now, I did see her once when I was 15. And then I saw her again in my 20s when I became a mother myself. And we had a very just messy reconnection. She wasn't ready. We made all the mistakes. I speak up for myself because I feel like I held my truth in for so long, but also to support alienated parents in reaching out to their kids, and hopefully alienated adult children hear my story or stumble on it or something, or hear all of yours, and before it is too late, and that they reach out sooner. And with all the information there is today, I feel like it could go a lot better for other people than it went for me during my reconnecting attempts.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And for people watching, I'm going to be interviewing Dana shortly. And here's her book right here. It is called You Know Who, An Alienated Daughter's Memoir, So you can get that. And then I will also put a link to it in the description. So if people want to learn more about your story, they can. Elise, could you please introduce yourself and why you speak out about this?
Yeah, of course. And I just wanted to say hey to Dana because Dawn and I both interviewed Dana previously as well. And
Yes.
it's really good to
Hi.
see you in here and talk to
too.
you. So we're a small group, but we're growing bigger. That's for sure. So
That's good.
I'm glad you're
That's
here.
good news.
Yeah. And I'm Elise. I'm in my 50s. I am in Australia. I live and breathe parental alienation probably from the minute I was born, unfortunately. I study it. I do it professionally. I'm a clinical psychotherapist and now I'm a doctor with a PhD in severe parental alienation. So it's what I live and breathe. I have 3 hats. I'm a researcher of severe parental alienation in adults. I'm a clinical psych, and I'm also an adult child of severe parental alienation. So I get the space very well, unfortunately. I think according to my father's stories, the marriage started to break down pretty much soon as I was born. So, and then there were 2 kids after me. So I think the alienation started very early during the marriage, which we know can happen. They divorced around when I was 7 or 8, and then my mother decided to move us. We were getting moved all the time, but then she also decided to change our names and move us interstate under false names. So we were abducted into a different state from a pretty young age. And then the wheels fell off life, really, for me. And so I didn't see Dad again for probably another 20 years. And we were told all sorts of stuff, pretty serious stuff. He was going to come around and abduct us, or one of his friends would abduct us, or we would be abducted and killed, or we would be on contact visits and something terrible would happen on the contact visit. So we were really caught up in the delusional stuff that was going on with my alienating mother, because when you're a child, you have no power. So you tend to believe the people who are around you who are supposed to be protecting you and having your best interests at heart, not lying to you. So that's a hard thing. So I didn't reunite with him until I was 30. That was very difficult. But I was getting a lot of help from a Catholic nun who I've worked with for 30 years. So she's beautiful. She's in my life all the time. And then I had 25 years with my father before he passed away. There was a lot of false allegations, and the reason why I do this work is because I do not want any other children in the world to ever go through what we went through, and I see it all day long at work. I read about it, I research it. It is absolutely true, and it's rife. And then I got hit. My dad's been married a few times, and then one of his other wives was also a serious level alienator who didn't want me or my siblings in my father's life after we reunited. So, and he was in domestic violence until he died. She did not want him to have any relationship with us, and she was really coercively controlling him. So I got hit with another alienator. I had an alienating mother and another alienating step parent. And when you got 2 coming at you, it's a different world. That's why I live and breathe it. And I'm very happy to be here in this group because it's time we talked.
Thank you for being here, Elise, and sharing a bit of your story. And thank you for the work that you do. So we have an anonymous member who's going to be going by the name of Lotus. So welcome, Lotus. Could you please introduce yourself and why you speak out?
Well, because I'm concerned about anonymity, I would just share selectively. I'm speaking out because I feel like my experience expands on what seems like the typical alienation experience, where it's very dichotomized, it's very black or white, it's very mother versus father, father versus mother. In my case, I think it started when I was about 7 or 8. I'm actually still processing, and this is a rather recent discovery, so it's really my first time talking about it. But it started when I was 7 or 8. And I think I didn't really realize what had happened until I was in my 20s. And I didn't really truly realize it until very recently, as I am fighting for my own child as a now alienated parent myself. But I think the takeaway I want to leave is that for me, the alienation happened in a seemingly intact family. My parents were not divorced. They were not separated. They should have been. I don't really have a parent. Like, I have not even one.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being brave enough to be here. I hope that you can find that this is a supportive, welcoming space. So let's get into this crazy news, guys. I'm just going to share my screen so we can watch this 2-minute video together and then just share our reactions. So this is coming from the CTV news channel, and it's about a bunch of feminist, I think, activists groups that are trying to form a coalition to ban the term parental alienation and its use in family court. So let's check out this video and then we can talk about it.
This morning, a coalition of over 250 feminist organizations sent a letter to the Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice, and all party leaders to demand legal reform to prohibit the use of parental alienation accusations in family law cases. The coalition includes national organizations, organizations from all provinces and 2 territories, research, legal, direct services, and advocacy organizations, over 60 local women's shelters, and Indigenous, 2S LGBTQIA+, and disability rights organizations, among others. Such a wide coalition, sending such a united message, underscores the absolute urgency of this issue. It is with no exaggeration that we call on the Federal Minister of Justice, the Honorable Arif Virani, to put an end to a Canada-wide crisis that is destroying countless lives. Across the country, victims of family violence are being disbelieved, silenced, and punished based on the sexist and unscientific theory of parental alienation. Mothers who dare speak up about the father's violence are treated with great suspicion, and children who express their wishes not to reside with an abusive father lose their voice, as they are thought to be confused, lying, or brainwashed. This sexist narrative is perpetrated by so-called experts who misunderstand domestic violence, and by courts who fail to see the pseudoscience of parental alienation for what it is, a false narrative that is not evidence-based and that further harms women and children who are victims of their abusive partners and fathers. For years, feminist experts and researchers have raised alarm bells about this issue, which has become omnipresent in family courts across the country. Research, education, and training have not been sufficient. This is why we're here today with an urgent call for action to the Honorable Arif Virani, Federal Minister of Justice. Change the law to ban parental alienation accusations from being used in family disputes.
Does anyone jump in? And then if anybody else wants to talk, if you raise your hand, we'll just go to the next person. What do you guys think about that video initially? Dawn?
Yeah, I mean, we have lived experience with this. I think we as insiders know what exists and what we've had to endure. And the fact that alienation happened, they can call it whatever they want or not address it as what it is, but alienation is what happened. We were alienated from somebody. That term is used widely around the world for a lot of the same situations, not necessarily against a parent. The reason why parents brought into it is because it's one parent doing it to another. And I witnessed it. I saw it, I heard it, I know it. I didn't know what it was called until after my father died. That's when I started learning that there was actually a name for it, and the name makes sense. I'm not hiding behind domestic violence. My father wasn't hiding behind domestic violence. My mother has her own reasons for doing whatever it was that she did. My mom was selfish in her actions, And she took it upon herself to change the trajectory of my life by bashing my father and the other half of me. That's what parental alienation means to me. And you can try and just deny that it exists, but you can't deny what happened to me. Whether or not it's the right term to use, and whether or not it's because they hate the person that coined it, none of that matters to me. The problem is that your children are hurting. They're being abused with this situation, and you're worried about a word. The semantics is a ridiculous argument. Okay, I'm gonna let someone else go.
I agree that the term makes sense, and obviously we all know it is a thing. It happens. It happened to all of us. I think yes, there probably are people who, abusive dads, who claim alienation when the mother's trying to protect herself and her children, and hence fighting around the term, even though we know it is parental alienation. And there are ways to figure out if somebody's claiming it and it's not actually happening. But it seems to me that parents going to court trying to fight to have their children back would probably be wise to not use the term, simply because of all the conflict around it. I would think they'd be wiser to just state the facts. Here's how the parent interfered with visiting time. Here's all the documentation of the interference and the coercive control, and it's psychological abuse. If I were a parent today in the courts, I probably wouldn't say my ex is committing parental alienation, just because if you get a judge who hates the term or is up in arms about it, you could hurt your case. That's what I think. I think it's very real. It's very frustrating. People invested now in discounting that parental alienation actually exists. I mean, that's infuriating. But if I were in court today, I probably wouldn't use the term. But outside of court, I mean, yeah, the term makes sense. It's not, yes, it's also narcissistic abuse and child psychological abuse and coercive control. And we can call it many different things, but it's a very specific kind of psychological control, a very specific kind of narcissistic abuse, and it's parental alienation.
Thank you. I think that's a fair point. I really do. I have this question that I would like to ask all of you. And this is talking about just your opinion, not related to court right now. In your opinion, does the term parental alienation accurately capture the emotional and psychological abuse that you went through?
I think so.
Sorry, and why?
Because we were alienated from a parent. And I would even go a step further. You're sort of forced to be alienated from yourself as a child for a time until you start to heal. So there's alienation from the parent and from yourself. I think it describes it as well as any phrase I could think of.
I'm curious if you agree with that statement, that parental alienation accurately describes to you what you went through as a child. Raise your hand. Let me just see. Lotus, you can do an emoji if you have those. Okay.
I was going to add to it, though, that parental alienation is the good gateway term. We need a word that makes sense to cover all of these other situations, like mine included abduction. How do we all have a conversation and know what the topic is about unless we have a word that means the same to each one of us? And that's really what we consider the use of the word, is it's a word that is, globally known as something that we've experienced either as a parent or a child. But I agree with Dana too. You might also create more problems in court if you're trying to use a term that's not in the DSM-5. So there's better words to use that can be referencing that DSM diagnosis, but we also have to worry about, and Elise can talk to this even further, attorneys can't diagnose. Attorneys should not be calling another parent something, and spouses shouldn't be saying, my ex is this or that without a real clinical diagnosis. So when we're talking about what's in the DSM-5, it's a completely different animal than the conversation that we're having here tonight. We're discussing the effects of this term called parental alienation, which is emotional and psychological abuse of a child.
They both cover the vast majority of the thoughts that I was having, where one, it's a function of semantics, and so arguing about what it is not important. What matters is the experience, the lived experience that everyone here and many other people who are not able to share their voice are experiencing either right now or in retrospect. And the other thing that really comes to mind is that I think this group, and I don't want to sound dismissive, but I don't think they have a chance. I don't think that their whole banging the pot and saying, give me attention, please. I mean, their whole approach has no grounds in the legal world because, one, how do you legislate this? Like, effectively legislate it? How do you put it in paper in a way that would be fair, in a way that would support the general public? I remember for my current employer, the boss's mom actually reached out to me because she knew about parental alienation. She was saying, you know, I noticed in your bio that you do some of these things, and I'm really thankful for you. And so, like, the general public out there is wanting to be, wants to be united with their family. The general public wants to feel connected. And what we're seeing is just a select group of people who are trying to shift politics in a way and get as much attention. But I don't think they have any room to make any change because there's no money in it. You know, there's no money in it. There's no there's no way for it to be politically favorable to ban parental alienation. And even if they did, we'd find another term.
Good points.
I just wanted to add to that piece about parental alienation and whether or not it's valid. And unfortunately, I can't share all the details of my case, but I think the feminists and domestic violence groups that are lobbying against the term are misinformed, and they don't have a good understanding of what parental alienation actually is. Because as someone that has been through domestic violence coercive control, I actually was working with a domestic violence organization for a number of years trying to get out of this very abusive relationship. And the irony is my case flies in the face of what these groups are saying, that it's a sexist thing, that it doesn't happen to mothers. I'm a mom and it's happened to me. And so my story flies in the face of what they're saying, which is that it's sexist against women, because, you know, it's actually the reverse of what they're saying. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, and this is a continuation of that abuse, of my daughter being taken away from me. So I just wanted to add that piece to how valid parental alienation is. And I think it's extremely valid as a formerly alienated child and now as a targeted parent fighting for her alienated child.
Thank you for adding that perspective, because I think everyone can agree that anyone with a pulse can alienate, and that fathers can and do alienate mothers too. And knowing this, I think it's just a little more confusing why feminist coalitions would be so dead set on insisting that it is pseudoscience or not a real form of abuse. So thank you for sharing that.
I just want to share one other thing, and I don't want the feminist name or idea to get dragged through the mud, because for what it's worth, I identify as a feminist as well. So I'm being targeted I'm a targeted parent that is experiencing parental alienation, and I also identify as a feminist as well, just to, I think, broaden the conversation.
Yeah, the only reason I use the word feminist is because they are using it themselves to describe themselves. It seems like there are different sex of feminism these days. It's a whole nother topic though.
I watch a lot about the fighting that's going on. I am a frontline worker. I'm a domestic violence worker. I know the training intimately. I teach domestic violence. I see it like right in front of me all the time. I know it. I know exactly where these women are coming from and the feminists are coming from. I know what they're saying, and there is truth to some of it, but I really think that what we're seeing here is a reflection of what we're also seeing in the family court. It's a win at all costs. My side wins at all costs. And what really needs to change is this is not a gender issue. And every time they turn it into a gender issue, they're turning the light of the children who are being abused, psychologically and physically abused. While this fighting is going on, and I'm very strong on this, where are the children while all this fighting's going on? Are they listening to what you're all saying? Are they watching the videos that you're putting out, denigrating each other, fighting with each other, putting with each other down? Who's right, who's wrong, whether this term parental alienation is correct or not correct. The fact is, the adult children who've been experiencing parental alienation for our whole lives, we all 100% agree in this group, that's the term that we want. So by them saying not real, they're actually denying and minimizing our trauma and our abuse. So they're basically, if they did the same thing to the adult survivor of child sexual abuse groups that I talk to, if they came in and said to them, child sexual abuse isn't real, child sexual abuse didn't happen, we're changing the names, we don't like it, people are using that in family court to do all sorts of stuff. I can just imagine what those groups would do. So why are they doing that to us now? Why are they saying what we've experienced isn't real? And the whole time, and this fighting is boring. It's not a gender issue. And the other thing, I'm seeing all this fighting now going on out there in this big article, and they've all got together 250 feminist organizations from across Canada. That sounds pretty big, and some of them are disabilities groups. And the LGBTQIA plus community have come in. We're shining the light in the wrong places here. We've got to be shining the light on the children. What do the children need in this space? What are the children's voices? And I just think this winning at all costs is mirroring what I'm seeing in the family court professionals and what they're doing, and the $60 billion a year family divorce money that they're making in high conflict divorce in America. That's a win at all cost system. And they're not thinking about their behavior. This is just a war. It's just another war, really, on the earth they've created. It's time to let's all just sit down and start doing some really serious research. And I agree with Andrew. I think they're not understanding of what truly is going on in this space. I just don't think that they're trained. They're not mental health practitioners, a lot of them, and we know that the mental health practitioners are not being trained properly to understand this level of child psychological abuse. We know that from my research. So we're warring about two words that we all like. So I've got a lot to say in this space. Maybe one more thing. It's bloody infuriating. It's bloody infuriating. Like, stop the war. Just get on the same page.
I think we need a mic drop emoji on this.
I couldn't agree more, Elise. I couldn't agree more. No one thinks about the children, or they would be thinking, what term is going to help more kids wake up? You can have the term that society calls it, and then whatever you want to diagnose me with, like, go ahead, whatever, even they're in your book. But what do you guys think? Some people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. How can we keep the children at the forefront of this conversation?
I feel like we need more specialists, and I feel like them wanting to ban the word parental alienation being used in family court, like, is a step in the wrong direction. Judges and lawyers are not mental health specialists, and they're not experts in like attachment theory and psychology and all of that, but we need that to help these families figure their stuff out to protect the kids. That isn't happening. And I kind of feel like if they get their way, it takes away due process that's already happening. Like, there already is no due process for false allegations, and it just makes that problem even worse. And in turn, it hurts the kids, because now if the parental alienation isn't even investigated because the word is banned and it's not even allowed to be brought up, then the abuse that the kids are going through has even less of a chance of being taken seriously.
I think it does such a disservice too, in a public way. Kids or adult children who maybe are on the brink of discovering the truth hear the noise about, oh, did you hear parental alienation? That's a fake thing. Will just go back into hiding or back into, oh, okay, maybe that didn't happen to me. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm thinking my sister, who, it very much nearly destroyed our relationship, that she has not and probably will never realize what actually happened to us. And she very much is loyal to our father, who did the alienating. And, I fear that she's going to hear somewhere this noise about, oh, these groups who are saying parental alienation is not a thing. And her first thought would be, oh, see, I gotta tell Dana, that kind of thing. That's what makes me cringe is, and I mean, it's out of my control, but it's just unfortunate. But hopefully, like Andrew said, maybe this noise will pass, and maybe they're not as powerful as they would like to be, and hopefully it dies down.
Wow, thank you for bringing that point up. I didn't even think about that, but in some ways, by claiming it's pseudoscience, that prevents kids from figuring it out, even if they hear the term. Wow. It's really scary.
Piggybacking off of Bree and Dana, because, again, both really great points. First thing I think is that, I guess, the grounds for why they hate that term so much is just because Richard Gardner was a controversial guy. I mean, he was all right when he came up with the parental alienation syndrome terminology, and then he went off the deep end, and people really didn't like what he came up with after that. And from what I understand, I haven't really read that material. From what I understand, that's where a lot of the whole oh, this guy's a hack, this guy's coming up with pseudoscience kind of argument is built off of, because of his just shattered reputation. Bree was mentioning how we needed more specialists, and I resonate with that a lot. And to kind of build on top of that, it's just an education thing, really. And so, like, this platform, for example, and all the other individual speakers who are building their own platforms and sharing their stories, sharing their experiences, those are really powerful things. Ginger Gentile's documentary of Erasing Family is another really powerful tool. I work in marketing, and repetition is the best form of getting your message across, really the best form of really staying top of mind for people. I'm very confident that everyone here has, maybe talked to a coworker about parental alienation, and they're like, oh, I didn't know it was called that, but I had, or so-and-so experienced this, or I experienced this, or something like that. They're able to immediately understand exactly what you're talking about. And so having more education about it, having more resources about that, and putting that front and center to just the general public, that will give a lot more power to those who are either in that situation and coming to realize that they've been alienated, or to the parents who are trying to figure out how to reach their kids.
Thanks for touching on the Richard Gardner.
I just want to add to that, and I think reiterate what Andrew said about marketing, because I think when you have different channels, and I think this is also harkens back to what Dana said about what alienated kids or kids that are about to wake up, is on the cusp, it can push you back if you know, like Dana said, you know, you can go back and say, well, you know, I'm hearing now that, you know, it's a pseudoscience, it's not real. So I think like consistent messaging is really important, like across different channels, but also harkening back to what Bree said about having more professionals involved. I can't agree with that more, because in my own experience of having gone through family court, best interest of the child is the most important, but yet they make the child take a stance and choose between their parents. It's like basic psychology 101 tells you that, you know, you don't put the kid in the middle, like you don't put a child in the middle, but that's exactly what the court does. And the court says, well, at 12, 14, 16, whatever age it is and whatever state it is, it's like the child is old enough to now choose. And it's like, well, you are helping to alienate the kid by putting the child in the middle, and you are the judge, you are the law. So it's like, if it's scary enough as an alienated child to be in that position, child's best interest is not prioritized. It's only lip service. It's not actually really happening, because the court would say, well, you know, we do have, you know, mental health services within our court, but it's like, it's not dictated. It's not being run by the mental health experts. It's still being dictated by the judge. The child's best interest really needs to be prioritized. And this fight right now, this noise, this distraction about parental alienation not being real, that is such a disservice to alienated children. It doesn't have the child's best interest at heart. So that's my piece.
Great. I love that you brought that up, because they like to claim the child's best interests, but I love that you push back on that. Jacqueline, what are your thoughts?
Okay, guys, I've been waiting a little while to talk to everybody, but I keep hearing the court, the court, the court, the court. Well, what about kids like me who was never involved in the court? My parents didn't get divorced until after I was married. What can kids look up that are alienated in the same home? I was never involved in a court custody case, never once. I mean, my dad didn't leave until well after I was married and out of the house. I keep hearing, you know, it's mom against dad. What about these kids that are being put in the middle in the same home? The court's not even going to know about these kids because there's nothing, you know, there's no custody ballot will even bring these people in. The term is universal. It can cover people like me as well. On the outside, my family was a perfect family. And, you know, my parents, you know, danced at my wedding and they were together at my wedding. But I still have a strained relationship with my dad. I still have a strained relationship with both of my parents. And, you know, it is possible to happen in the same house. Are kids that are alienated in the same home, are we just the lost kids? Because you guys keep bringing up the court, the court, the court. You know, I didn't have a court case. They were like you guys who had a court case. But me, I was never caught up in any litigation between my parents at all. But I know I was alienated from my dad. I mean, I was just sitting on that for a while, guys, but that's just my perspective.
I agree with you 100%, Jacqueline. I see it a lot, and there's a lot of alienation going on within intact families. We know that. And it also takes money to get to family court. Some of the people I work with, they're like, who talk to me about their court costs, they're like talking about $700,000 and $800,000, and I'm like, what? You know? So I mean, and here we are back again at the $60 billion industry thing. So what happens to the families who are still arguing not divorcing or not separating if they're not married, and the children in those marriages? What's going on with those kids? Who's noticing that dynamic? And how many kids are there in that dynamic? Because I know quite a few. Yeah, exactly. Right. So because there's no research on that yet, because they don't come forward and they don't speak, and a lot of them don't realize, and a lot might think that you have to go through court to be alienated.
Together, our relationship is healthy. Like their relationship is healthy, even though they can have a very toxic dynamic.
Correct.
You know, they might think that's normal. I didn't think anything different. I thought it was a normal thing the way my parents interacted. But then getting out as an adult and, you know, opening my eyes, I realized that it's not normal. You know.
So how do we get to those kids, Jacqueline?
I don't know how, but I don't think that they should be excluded, you know, and I do think that it is a problem. And,
They need to be included.
the court, I hear it, but I mean, parental alienation, like, we were all talking about the term. I think that universal term also umbrellas kids like me. So kids can also easily look it up. I looked it up once I figured out about narcissistic abuse. And I look at parental alienation as a symptom of narcissistic abuse. So, me as a kid in the same home, my parents didn't separate until after I left home and was a married woman myself. I was able to look that up and identify with it. So I think that's where the term is important.
I want to tag on to what Jacqueline was saying about what happens to those of us that didn't have parents that went through court. My parents weren't actually married, not legally anyway. So when my mom left, my dad was like, what do I do? He didn't know what he had a right to do. He didn't realize that he did have a right to fight for me in court. So back then in the 70s, it was early 70s, men didn't usually have that fight unless they were married, and then there was a custody agreements and whatnot. He didn't have a path for that. So what happens to us when we're left out? And that's a big problem for people like us, because we're generally left out of the conversation anyway. Even as adults, look at all the experts that are talking about us, but they're not including us. So that is what I wanted to add to Jacqueline. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about Richard Gardner. I mean, what is the hang up on Richard Gardner? I don't even know who this guy is. I realized that he did a lot of research and he apparently coined the term parental alienation, but I want people to realize that he didn't invent it. He didn't say, oh, today parental alienation exists to be a problem as we go forward from this moment on. No, parental alienation existed centuries and centuries way before he ever brought up the term. That they're more angry at Richard Gardner than anything else because of what he stood for in the end. Whatever, right or wrong or indifferent with him, it doesn't negate the actual experience that children are going through around the world today. So when we were doing the Erasing Family documentary, there was 22 million parents at the time, and I think it's now like 25 million parents that were alienated from their children. Now, if you look at the census has an average of 2 children per household. So if a parent is alienated from their children, you're now talking about 44 million to 50 million children that are without a parent. And I think that's more important than the words.
I want to give you a standing ovation for that. That's great. And it's an ad hominem attack anyway.
This is why I call it the life sentence, because it is something that we will always have to work through in some way, shape, or form. We're going to have stuff come up throughout our experiences because we haven't really worked through all of it until it kind of presents itself. So for example, like last time we talked, I was sharing how I was struggling with the fact of being estranged from my mom, and is it okay to just be okay with that estrangement again? And it's not the first time I've been estranged, but I still feel like, and like I just posted in the chat, we all want our parents to love us. And even though she's done some horrific things, I still want my mom to love me. And I still need a mom, and I don't have one. So I have one that's living and walking on this earth, but not someone I can go to. So I totally understand the struggle, and it's okay to work in and out of that. And who knows, maybe I'll get a call from my mom someday, and what will I do then? Am I going to, I have to set boundaries at this point, and I have to say, look, I can't just be on again, off again. You can't just call me when you need something. I need to know that you're there all the time and not just when it suits you. So, I'm struggling with setting those boundaries. Yeah.
What Lotus said about feeling like an orphan. And yeah.
Oh, an orphan.
That's a big word. Yeah. A lot of us feel
Definitely.
that. Sorry.
And I think sometimes being in the presence of the parent that did the alienating and their supporters, other family members who support them and enable them can feel like we're being gaslit just by being in their presence, because you can't speak your truth in their presence and be accepted or have it not blow up. I think it's probably something we all struggle with on and off.
So Elise, let's end with your research that you found.
Well, I've got a lot of questions regarding this document. I also want to know, like, these are pretty broad statements that they're making, and a lot of it is unsubstantiated from what I'm reading. So I think that one of the adult children that I interviewed, her father was accused of domestic violence against the mother, and the father was very domestically violent against the mother. And the children would watch it. But, and this is very controversial, what she also said was, sure, there was domestic violence in the house, but he never, ever, ever hurt me. And he also said his mother used to provoke a lot of it. And we have two types of violent people that I work with. One's called characterologically violent. That's how they're termed. That means it's in their character to be violent. When I'm working in the jails, if they've got that diagnosis, I have to work very differently with those people. If they're situationally violent, and this is what I have to find out a lot of the time with people who've been falsely accused of domestic violence and had the silver bullet aimed at them, situationally violent people are very different. A lot of the time it is a particular situation that they will push back on. And I hear this a lot in DV work. Male, female, sometimes we'll have someone who is just pushes and pushes and pushes, is in their face. What are you going to do about it? Pushing them, pushing them, pushing them. Then once the other person retaliates, the person who's provoking is on the phone to the police, and guess who's getting arrested? The one who has been provoked and provoked and provoked and provoked. And I can tell you, I've got quite a few people on my books at the moment who come to me saying, this is a situation, she was really drunk, she was provoking, provoking, and provoking. I didn't want to have sex with her. This is an example. She pushed me and pushed me, then she was hitting me, she was on top of me, on top of me, on top of me, he said. And then he said, I pushed her off and I kicked her off the bed. That is situational violence. That's not characterological violence. So he hasn't done that before, and he was bawling his eyes out, but he's also now has serious charges against him and a domestic an AVO against him, and now all the light is on him. So there's a lot in this space. There's a lot underneath DV once we start to uncover it and work with it, and then we have to bring in and work with the people and teach them new ways, new language, not violent communication. We need to teach them non-violent communication. A lot of Marshall Rosenberg stuff we teach in the jail system. And anyway, getting back to my research, this adult daughter who I was talking to, she said she didn't care how aggressive her dad was to her mum. She was provoking her and she still wanted a relationship with him. She didn't care, but the court system wouldn't let her. So there's another grey area here. We can't do, oh, he's domestically violent, there's a charge against him, or she's domestically violent, because I can tell you now, I sit in front of domestically violent women who are characterologically violent. They are huge provokers. And this is not a black and white space. So to be putting out articles like this is very questionable in my eyes. And they're just running with the ball, and they're not stopping at any point and thinking, where's the emotional intelligence in this conversation? Where's my research? how's my training coming in? What's my bias? What am I doing in here? Is this actually good what I'm doing? What's the long-term repercussions on just being in this space? This is black and white, black and white. We've recently had 50-50 custody abolished in Australia, and it's because of this sort of stuff coming through, the domestic violence arguments. It's because of that. So now anybody who is accused of any kind of DV, or if there's any remote silver bullet, or just even as a general screen, people are being given these new screening tests. One of my men who's been accused of DV, and anyway, he got made to do this test and I had it analysed. One of my guys was being made to do this report. So, and who wrote it and where did it come from and what's the research behind it and who are the people who designed it. So I had it analysed, and that's a whole different topic for another day, but this article is bleeding into now us not having 50-50 custody in Australia. That's a big concern for children.
I think that's a great place to end the conversation, because these articles and these coalitions coming together, you know, this can have a lasting, deeper impact on children. Before we say goodbye and thank you, I would just like to end on a little note of hope to everybody on this call. I hope you know that I appreciate you and that each one of you guys truly have touched my life deeply. And it is so meaningful to me to be able to talk with you guys and amplify our voices. A targeted parent shared a poem with me when I did the Utah campaign last November, and I wanted to share it with all of you guys because she shared it with me and she said, "Maddie, you're a bridge builder." I had no clue what that meant, but now after meeting you guys, you all are bridge builders. So let me read you this poem about where the term bridge builder comes from, and this is going out to all of you guys and to all of our other friends in the support group and other people who are not even in the support group yet, but are still in our shoes. This isn't too long. It's called The Bridge Builder by Will Allen Drumgoole. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fear for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. "Old man," said a fellow pilgrim near, "you are wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day, and you never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build this bridge at evening tide?" And the builder lifted his old gray head. "Good friend, in the path I have come," he said, "there followed after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been at naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him." We've all had others build bridges before for us. For me, it was Ryan Thomas 2 years ago, and Andrew 2 years ago. I stumbled across his video too, and Dawn and Elise and everyone on this, and Dana and Bree and Jacqueline and Lotus, everybody on this call, we are bridge builders. Amanda Sillers too in Australia has taken the lead and built a bridge for people like us. And now tonight we get to pay it forward. Many alienated children are out there trying to find a bridge if they don't even know it yet, or they're looking for a bridge and just can't find one, or they might be struggling to find the courage to go ahead and cross the bridge. And tonight, in their honor, we seek to lend them a hand and to continue moving forward and build more bridges for them. So I want to sincerely thank all of you very much for taking the time out of your life to participate in tonight's discussion. And I hope you know that I appreciate every one of you. And I'm so excited that to see what we can accomplish together this year. Thank you so much for being here, guys.